Hi, this is Lady Lex UK and here is another tutorial for Project Spark, and today we'll be making Little Big Planet style emitters, and what this will allow you to do is make disappearing and appearing bridge steps, platforms. So as you can see there was no bridge, but as I hit and got in front of those emitters it created a platform for me, and it's doing the same here, but this time there's a timer on them. So if I wait too long, I will fall to my death. So let's move along. And here we have a timed version. So we have 3 stepping stone platforms, which I have to jump over to get to the other side. So let me show you how I made these. First of all, let me show you the respawn mechanic before we get any further with this. What I have here is a kill block. So I look at its brain, it says when I bump the player, kill it. So if the player lands on that, they're dead. Then in this player's brain, where it says once, you add global respawn point equals position. So it starts off with the global respawn point being the position in which you create your character in the first instance, and you make sure that destroy after death equals false. So you make sure once you're dead it doesn't destroy your character, so you can move him and revive him. And what we do with that is we say when started to be is dead, we set a boolean called dying equals true, and when you're dying, duration timer of 2 will fade it with a transition of 2, so it will go to black, and then after 2 seconds we'll change our position to be the global respawn position, revive our player, and then turn the dying boolean off. And that's it. That's the respawn. If you want to have multiple respawn points and you have to set them, you will have to set them. So they'll only set this point as a global respawn at the beginning. And then over here I have another cube which has been put at the correct X position for our player, so that when he gets to this point he can bump this logic cube. When he bumps the logic cube, we'll set the global respawn point to be this cube's position. Now we need this because we're playing it in 2D platformer mode, and the X position is locked off, so we can only move along one X coordinate. So we don't want this block to be somewhere where it's slightly out position and you won't bump into it. But I think that will sort that one out and make sure it's in the correct position. So there we have, that's the respawn. When you're making a 2D platform, make sure you put the 2D platformer brain into your character first before you start building any of your structures, because the last thing you want is to start making your platformers and then discover you've got it at the completely wrong orientation. So check to see which way your player is running and where you need to put your first obstacle, and then it will all follow on from there. Okay, so let's make our emitter. I'm going to use the speaker gizmo for this because it looks a bit like the Little Big Planet emitter. They by default are invisible, so we'll make that visible and we'll just colour it in so it looks black, so it looks more like the emitter. Obviously, because this is a brain, you can put it in any object you like. It doesn't have to be the speaker gizmo, and it doesn't have to be a visible gizmo either. It can be totally invisible, so the player can't see it. But for this demonstration, I wanted you to be able to see the emitter, and you might want other people to be able to see the emitter so that they know that there's an invisible bridge there if they walk. Okay, so once you've created your speaker, you need to turn its sensors on. So we'll go into brain and sensors, and we want the trigger sensor, so we'll turn that one on. Now this is quite a large sensor, so we want to reduce the size of it. You can't do it with the handle here, you have to do it with the scaling buttons here. So we'll scale this down to 4% for each, because we're making a cube. That's about right for what I want, I think. You can make it smaller or bigger, whatever. And then we need to place that in front of our sensor. Now, you have to look at it from all angles so that you get it in the right position. I think that's about right. Okay, there we go. Now we'll move that into position where we want that to be. I've already got one over here that I've got in position, so I can delete this. And then you put your block in, and you pop it underneath so it lines up with your pathway where it's going to be in relation to this sensor. So really and truly, you want it sort of the trigger zone to be resting on top of your cube, and your cube to be pretty much level with your path. Then when you've done that, we've got to actually find out what the coordinates of our block are going to be when we create them. So the way we do this is we need to find out the relationship between the position of this and the position of this. So what we do in both brains is we put this bit of code: display position above. And I'll show you what that does. Okay, it's given us two sets of coordinates. That's where the block is, and the one above is where the sensor is. And what you want to do is you want to take away those three numbers from the bottom numbers away from the top three numbers. And that will give you three numbers. And the first number is X, the second number is Y, and the third number is Z or Z. X, Y, Z, these are coordinates. So you take the bottom from the top and gives you three numbers, and then we're going to put those numbers into our brain for our sensor. So we've got the top here. So we create a number variable called X, and we say X is the position of X, which is the coordinate position of our sensor, minus the number, whatever number that was. And same for the Y, and same for the Z. And then we say our vector variable for box, where we want the box to be, equals east multiplied by the X number, plus world up multiplied by the Y number, plus north multiplied by the Z or Z number. And that will give you the position of the box in relation to that sensor. So when you copy and paste that sensor over and over and over again, that box will appear in front of it and not in front of the first sensor, because we're putting it in a relative position. Okay? Right, when started to in trigger zone player, so when the player is in the trigger zone, object variable box equals create our cube at the position of our box variable, and we're no longer in the trigger zone, then destroy our box. And that's it. That's the whole of the code. Now, I've put an ignore line into our display position. You can just delete this once you're happy with it, but in case you need to see the code again, I just put an ignore in, and that ignores that line completely and doesn't put the display on. Now then, this slightly different variation here, this timed one, everything 1 to 4 is exactly the same. When you get to line 5, it says when it's in the trigger zone, players in trigger zone, and there's no box, then create a box, exactly the same as before. When there is a box, there's a countdown of 1 second, and then we destroy the box. Now I've done it this way because I'm going to use the same cube for different emitters. If you were using a specific cube for this specific type of emitter, then you could put this countdown timer in the box itself, and you wouldn't need lines 6 and 7, because it would automatically destroy itself after whatever time you wanted. but because I'm using the same cube for all of these examples, I've had to put it in this brain. So it's up to you, either way is fine. And for the timed example, we've got created a loop. So we say countdown loop 1 second, timer incremented by 1. So every second the timer is incremented by 1. When the timer equals 4, so after 4 seconds, we create our box at position of box, the same as before, and then we put our timer back to 0. When we've got our box, we've got a countdown of 2 seconds this time, so it lasts a little bit longer, and then we destroy our box. And for each one we've got further on, we put another line in above it, so we say countdown timer of 1 second before we start our loop. So we put that in and then make that a child line, and then everything else is the same. And then for the next one along, we want to delay it by 2 seconds, so we got countdown timer of 2 before we start our loop. And that way you chained up, created a chain of these emitters so that they're emitting one after the other as they go across. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned, which I probably should, is I've made my block a template. Because you're going to be creating lots of these, you need to make this a template so you can create it over and over and over again. If you forget to do that, then you're moving this block backwards and forwards, and it's going to cause all sorts of problems. It could fly into the air and all sorts. So make sure you've made that a template in order to get this to work. And that is it. It's as simple as that. That's how you do Little Big Planet emitters in Project Spark. So thank you for watching and keep sparking.